Oh, precious people, do you not know, do you not understand? The presence of God is so real, so near, so tender, but oh, how often we drown out His voice. How often we allow the noise of the world, the distractions, the little habits, yes, those tiny things, to build walls between us and the sweet, sweet presence of Jesus. You see, God is always speaking, always. He is calling, leading, guiding, but so many cannot hear. So many live in confusion, wondering why their prayers feel empty, why their hearts feel dry. But, my friend, it is not that God is silent. It is that we have filled our lives with habits that block His voice. Tonight, I want to share with you 6 habits, yes, 6 things you must lay down, you must surrender, you must let go of, if you truly, truly desire to hear the voice of God. If you long to walk in His will, if you hunger for His presence, then, oh beloved, this message is for you. Fear is one of the greatest barriers to hearing God's voice. It grips the heart, clouds the mind, and drowns out the gentle whispers of the Holy Spirit. When fear takes root, it causes a person to question, to hesitate, to doubt whether God is truly speaking. Fear magnifies obstacles, making them seem insurmountable, and in doing so, it silences faith. Instead of trusting in the promises of God, fear drives a person to rely on human reasoning, on circumstances, on what seems possible in the natural. But faith, oh, faith. Faith looks beyond the seen, beyond the tangible, and holds on to the unseen reality of God's power and presence. So many desire to hear the voice of God, yet they allow fear to dictate their steps. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of stepping into what God has called them to do. And in that fear, they hesitate, they waver, they question if it was truly God who spoke. The enemy knows that fear is a weapon, a tool that can paralyze, that can keep a person stagnant, unwilling to move forward into the divine plan God has laid before them. And so he whispers lies, planting seeds of doubt, making one feel unworthy, incapable, uncertain. The voice of fear is loud, persistent, demanding attention at every turn. It disguises itself as caution, as wisdom, as logic, but in reality it is a thief, stealing the very faith that allows a person to walk boldly in the will of God. The more one listens to fear, the harder it becomes to recognize the voice of God. Faith requires stillness, a surrender of control, a willingness to believe that what God has spoken is true, even when everything around says otherwise. Unforgiveness is a heavy weight, a chain that binds the heart and dulls the spirit. It clogs the soul, making it difficult to hear the still, small voice of God. Bitterness takes root like a weed, growing deeper with time, choking out love, peace, and joy. Many long to hear God, to walk in His presence, but they hold on to offenses, replaying the pain, reliving the wounds, refusing to release those who have hurt them. The heart that harbors unforgiveness is like a vessel filled with murky water, unable to receive the fresh, living flow of the Holy Spirit. God speaks to the heart that is tender, open, but when bitterness settles in, it distorts perception, making it difficult to discern His voice. The enemy knows this, and so he stirs up resentment, whispers justifications for holding grudges, convincing a person that they have the right to remain hurt. But the truth remains, unforgiveness does not imprison the offender. It imprisons the one who refuses to let go. It is a barrier, a wall that stands between the soul and the divine whispers of the Lord. Many pray, many seek God's direction, but they wonder why His voice seems distant. They search for clarity, but their hearts remain clouded by unresolved pain. Forgiveness is not about denying the wrong done, nor is it about excusing the actions of others. It is about surrender, about placing the burden in the hands of God, about choosing to release so that the heart can be free. When the soul is uncluttered, when bitterness no longer occupies the space meant for grace, the voice of God becomes clear. His guidance flows unhindered. His presence is felt deeply, and peace replaces the turmoil that once ruled the heart. The voice of God is still, gentle, and full of peace. But in a world filled with constant noise, it becomes difficult to hear him. The mind is bombarded with information, the heart is pulled in many directions, and the soul is rarely given a moment of stillness. The distractions come in many forms: social media, entertainment, endless responsibility, the constant need for validation and approval. The world moves at a relentless pace, demanding attention, keeping people occupied, always busy but rarely fulfilled. In this chaos, the quiet whispers of God are drowned out, buried beneath the noise of daily life. Many long to hear from God, but their lives are too crowded, too cluttered with things that hold no eternal value. Time that could be spent in His presence is given away to fleeting distractions. Instead of seeking His voice, many seek the next notification, the next conversation, the next temporary pleasure that satisfies for a moment but leaves the soul empty. The enemy knows that if he cannot pull someone into sin, he can keep them so distracted that they have no room left to listen. A heart that is overstimulated by the world will struggle to recognize the presence of God. God speaks in stillness, in moments of quiet surrender, when the noise fades and the heart is fixed on Him. He is not found in the rush, in the busyness, in the constant movement, but in the moments of deep, undivided attention. When the distractions are removed, when the unnecessary noise is silenced, the soul becomes sensitive once again. The voice that once seemed distant becomes clear. The guidance that once felt lost becomes evident. The presence that once felt absent becomes evident. The presence that once felt, yet so many neglect the very place where their souls are refreshed. Life becomes busy, responsibilities pile up, and the demands of each day seem unending. Prayer is pushed aside, time in the Word is shortened, and worship becomes something done out of obligation rather than deep longing. The distractions of life slowly take priority, and before long the presence of God feels distant, His voice hard to recognize. The soul that was once sensitive to Him begins to grow dull, and what was once a thriving relationship becomes dry, routine, and lifeless. God is always near, always speaking, always longing for intimacy with His children, but He will never compete for attention. He waits to be sought, to be desired, to be placed first above all else. The enemy knows this, and so he fills life with endless demands, keeping the heart so occupied that time with God becomes an afterthought. But just as a branch cannot survive apart from the vine, neither can the soul thrive apart from His presence. Without consistent communion with Him, faith weakens, discernment fades, and the ability to hear His voice becomes more difficult. It is in His presence that burdens are lifted, wisdom is imparted, and strength is renewed. It is in the quiet place with Him that confusion is replaced with divine direction. Yet many live spiritually malnourished, running on empty, trying to navigate life without the very source of their strength. The more time spent with Him, the clearer His voice becomes. The more He is prioritized, the more peace and certainty fill the heart. To neglect time with Him is to neglect the very key to hearing and knowing His will. Doubt is one of the greatest barriers to hearing the voice of God. It creeps in subtly, often disguised as logic, caution, or the need for reassurance. When God gives a promise, when He speaks a word, He is faithful to fulfill it. Yet human nature struggles with waiting. The longer the delay, the louder the doubts become. Questions begin to rise. Did God really speak? Did I hear Him correctly? What if I was wrong? The mind starts to lean on its own understanding, seeking signs, seeking confirmation, and when things do not happen on a desired timeline, discouragement sets in. The enemy thrives in seasons of waiting. He whispers lies, planting seeds of doubt, making one question the very voice they once believed with certainty. He points to circumstances, to what is seen rather than what is spoken, convincing the heart that maybe God has forgotten, maybe he has changed his mind. But God does not operate on human timelines. His ways are higher, his timing is perfect, and every delay serves a purpose beyond what can be understood in the moment. Yet, when doubt takes root, it creates distance, making it difficult to perceive his guidance. Faith is what keeps the connection strong. It is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. When faith is replaced by doubt, the spiritual ears become dull. The voice of God, once so clear, becomes clouded by uncertainty. His direction, once trusted, becomes questioned. The waiting season is not a season of silence. It is a season of trust, a season of refining, a season where God is working behind the scenes. Those who continue to believe, even when nothing seems to be happening, will hear him more clearly, will walk in greater confidence, and will see his promises unfold in due time. Disobedience is one of the greatest hindrances to hearing the voice of God. His word is clear, his instruction. He expects obedience, not partial obedience, not delayed obedience, but full surrender to his will. Yet many struggle, holding onto their own desires, justifying actions that go against his word, convincing themselves that they can still hear him clearly while walking in compromise. But the further one drifts from obedience, the more distant his voice becomes. The enemy thrives in disobedience. He uses temptation to lure the heart away, making sin appear harmless, convincing the soul that small compromises do not matter. But every act of disobedience builds a wall between the heart and God's voice. The conscience becomes dull, the spirit becomes desensitized, and what was once clear instruction now feels confusing and uncertain. It is not that God has stopped speaking, it is that disobedience has made it harder to listen. He will not reveal more to a heart that refuses to follow what he has already spoken. Many seek new direction while ignoring the last thing God told them to do. They wonder why they cannot discern his will, why they feel distant, why they lack peace. But obedience is the key that unlocks clarity. God honors those who walk in his ways, who choose righteousness even when it is difficult. He leads those who are willing to follow, who surrender their own plans for his higher purpose. The more a person obeys, the more they recognize his voice. The more they align with his word, the clearer his guidance becomes, and the closer they walk in step with his divine plan. Relying on human strength creates a barrier between the soul and the voice of God. The flesh seeks control, striving to figure things out, to make things happen, to navigate life through effort and reasoning alone. But the ways of God are not understood through human wisdom. His voice is not discerned through logic or intellect, but through the guidance of the Holy Spirit. When a person leans on their own understanding, they often miss the gentle promptings of God. They become consumed with plans, strategies, and self-sufficiency, leaving little room for divine direction. The more one depends on self, the harder it becomes to recognize his leading. The Holy Spirit was given as a helper, a teacher, the one who reveals truth and leads into all wisdom. But when people rely on their own strength, they bypass the very source of supernatural guidance. They push forward in their own ability, exhausting themselves in the process, wondering why they feel lost, why doors seem closed, why confusion lingers. The Holy Spirit does not compete for control. He waits for surrender, for a heart that acknowledges its need for him. He speaks in stillness, in moments of trust, in the quiet reliance of a yielded soul. The enemy knows that self-reliance keeps a person disconnected from divine power. He encourages independence, convincing people that they can handle things on their own, that they do not need to wait on God. But human strength is limited, while the power of the Holy Spirit is limitless. Those who learn to yield, to walk in step with Him, experience a level of clarity, peace, and assurance that human effort can never produce. The more one depends on Him, the more clearly they hear, the more effortlessly they follow, and the more powerfully they walk in the will of God.